Alright, so I'm going to cut to the chase. There's been a lot of buzz of Fuji's new camera, the GFX 100 RF. It's a higher end point and shoot. It's a very pretty camera. It has 100 megapixels, has all of these things. And there's kind of a point of contention here and there on YouTube about it. But you know when there's something that's new and shiny out and you really want it and your mom says, hey, you already have that at home? I already have this at home. Now, I have the Fuji GFX 50R, and I bought this guy as a Christmas present. I've been using it over the last couple of months. For the most part, this video is just a way where I could show some of my photos that I got on a vacation out in Maui, but at the same time, at the release of this camera, I want to say that if you don't have the $5,000 price tag in order to buy the new GFX point-and-shoot camera, you might already be able to get one at half the price. There's a couple of caveats with that, but well, we'll get there. Now, just so we're aware of things, Fuji didn't give me this. They didn't sponsor this video. I actually bought this with my own money at a lot less of the price of the new GFX 100 RF. However, today's video is going to be sponsored by Artlist, which is a big supporter of this channel, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, if you've been hiding under a rock, you haven't been paying attention to threads, and maybe you haven't logged into YouTube over the last 24 hours, you might be wondering, what's the Fuji GFX 100 RF? Essentially, it's going to be the bigger, roided out brother of the X100V, which hopefully we have better stock of because, I don't know, it's more expensive now. That should make a lot of sense. But essentially what it's going to do is it's going to borrow the same sensor as the 100S2, which is actually another camera that's $5,000. It's also going to be a lot smaller and compact in size. I don't necessarily know the exact dimension. A ton of review videos have already covered that, but it's a much smaller camera than the normal GFX cameras that have been available for the last little while. You get a leaf shutter in this camera, so you don't necessarily have a maximum flash sync, which could be really handy if you have an external flash. And as well as they've added a new aspect ratio dial. Now for me personally, I've been shooting a lot of 65:24 aspect ratio, especially when I was in Maui. 4:3 is always kind of nice to have as well, but I kind of just like that X-Pan look. It's grown on me since last year. It has a built-in 4-stop ND, which isn't like a gradual ND. It's not variable. It just is either 4 stops or it's nothing. And you have the ability to crop into the image of the photos that you want. Apparently you also can shoot 4K 30 FPS. Now on the 100S Mark II, which is around the same price as the 100 RF, you get a couple more shooting modes, although the fact that you do have 2 SD cards on the same camera as well. But if you want to get things like video postcards, maybe you're traveling, you only have this camera with you, and you just want to get a quick clip and use that ND filter or to get something very fast, you're able to do that on the GFX 100 RF. And last but not least, like other Fuji X100V, just other Fuji cameras in general, it's pretty. It's really, really pretty. Because I think nowadays there's a giant influx of just pretty cameras, which I don't necessarily have a problem with. Although some people do, which we may talk about a little bit later. It's kind of exhausting of a conversation, but it's another pretty camera that doesn't necessarily do the same things as the bigger professional guys, but it looks just as good in photos of taking BTS as it does actually taking photos with the camera. Now, the sponsor of today's video is Artlist. Now, they've added a couple of upgrades in terms of making finding stock footage a little bit easier, and as well as helping you actually organize some of the assets they have on the website, because they have quite a lot of them. Now, we're actually going to go into Artlist today, and I'm going to show you some of the process that I've used in some of the new features. For one, is going to be the search filters for finding some of your stock footage clips. I did shoot a bunch in Maui, so it makes only sense. I can search by video theme. I think I'm going to go elements of nature. We'll just see what that looks like. You're going to get a bunch of different footage over here that you could look through. I'm also going to go to shot type. I think I'm going to go with a golden hour. I don't necessarily need people in it, but you also have some filters here as well. One, you could choose vertical only. So if you do make Instagram stories or vertical content, you could choose to do it that way. And you could actually choose the time duration of how long you want to clip. Now, I only need them to be like maybe 20 seconds long. Something that's just long enough to put a title card over top of it. And then I could click the one I need, and there we go. I could download one of these guys, and I could use this as kind of a title card to help separate some of the sections of my video. You could also drag and drop a variety of assets that you could find on Artlist in order to get them into an organized place. If I find a song I like or a sound effect that I like, I could just drag and drop it into Artboard, or I could drag and drop it to my favorites, which just makes organizing and trying to find different things you want to curate a little bit easier. What's really cool as well is you also have the ability to get related assets based on the voiceovers that you could use using the AI voiceover tool. Now, not only can you formulate voiceovers using AI technology, which helps as a great starting point, but one thing you can do is it'll give you like associated assets that you could add it to an artboard. So if you are using some of these AI voiceovers as a starting point or a jump off point to actually curate a type of vibe that you want for a commercial, it'll actually find the different things that you might need in order to make that project come together from a music perspective, which is really, really cool. A special shout out to Artlist for actually sponsoring this video. A lot of these features are really cool, and some of these little upgrades make your life a little bit easier. But let's get back to the video. Now, I want to reiterate, this entire video is not an indictment on the Fujifilm GFX 100 RF. I'm going to try to call it a shorter name, and also having indictments on cameras that I haven't used doesn't make any sense, right? What makes this new point-and-shoot GFX camera important, or at least unique? Now, for one, it's the biggest sensor point-and-shoot that I think you could find. I might be corrected on that one, but this is going to be a medium format sensor. Now, there's a lot of arguments on what exactly constitutes medium format, but it's bigger than full frame, so I'm just going to call it medium format until we have a new name that's not that. Who knows? In terms of the full frame equivalent, it's about times 7.9. So if you have like a 35mm lens, it's closer to like a 20-something millimeter lens. Mac mumbo jumbo, but it's just a bigger sensor than other point-and-shoot cameras that exist. Now, if you haven't noticed, this is kind of an excuse for me to show off GFX photos that I got on my 50R since I bought it, because I haven't made a video in a little while about this camera. But I also want to point out the price of this camera, which might be contentious for some people, but also not a big deal for some others. So I'm going to offer a little bit of perspective. From a pure price perspective, if you're somebody that may be in the market for like a Leica Q3 43 or whatever Leica camera that is available, or a Hasselblad, and those guys are like, I don't know, like $7,000 to $10,000. They're incredibly expensive pieces of equipment, especially for a point and shoot that looks really fancy. The $5,000 price tag on the GFX 100 RF doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world. Now, obviously you're gonna have a bit of caveats. The lens isn't as fast. It doesn't have IBIS. It doesn't have great low light capabilities because it doesn't have IBIS. There's a whole bunch of other things that you could say that are kind of points of contention that are with this camera. However, if you're someone that's in that ecosystem that buys incredibly expensive point and shoot cameras, I think for those people, there's probably gonna be someone that's going to use it, and that's completely fine. I don't know why I made this video. And so you thought you can escape Uncle Kofi for today. We are still going to make the very important Ghanaian language of the day. So this one, you have to make sure you keep this one in your mind. And you have to make sure you focus on this one, especially because of this video. Now we are talking about a $5,000 point and shoot camera. If that's going to be your only camera, you must have very big money in your pockets. And maybe you're a big man, big woman, no. But if you are a normal person, maybe you only have, a few $1,000s. Maybe you only have $2,500. I'm going to give you a very important concept. It's called Nsesika. Nsesika, which means do not waste money. Which means that if you do not have the money for this, maybe you have holes in your socks. Maybe your rent is due. Maybe you have a phone bill and you have not paid this one, but you're looking on the internet for the GFX, whatever it's called, for $5,000. And says, Sika, just do not waste your money. But if you can find it, on maybe eBay, maybe on Facebook, maybe on those things, you can get this one. You can maybe get the GFX, the 50R. Because when Uncle Kofi had got this one for his nephew, this one was only half the price. In Sensika, you have to make sure you keep your mind, Keep your mind and keep your money, So, as Uncle Kofi quaintly put it, the GFX 50R, if you could find it used, depending on where you're going to be looking for it, it's actually going to be quite a good deal, although gives you some of the similar creature features, comforts, or whatever you want to call it from this new Fuji camera, although it's going to kind of be half the price. Now, when I got my Fuji GFX 50R with a 50mm f3.5 lens, I got it for just around $2,500, which is about half the price of this 100 RF, although it does a lot of the same things. The GFX 50R is still going to be kind of a rangefinder style kind of camera, although it is digital of a camera, it's not film. It does have a GFX sensor, which you could change out the lens if you ever want to, so it is compatible and has interchangeable lenses. Now, in terms of a compact lens, the 50mm f3.5 is the most small lens that you can find on this guy. And 3.5 is a little bit more than the f4, but albeit they're probably really close to being the same thing. So in terms of the bokeh that you're going to get out of it, in terms of the low light performance you can get out of it with the aperture, they're pretty much going to be the same thing. This does have dual card slots, and also the GFX 50R doesn't have IBIS either. And from what I understand, and considering I'm new to Fujifilm entirely, a lot of people really like this camera despite some of the flaws that are in the new camera. Well, you could save half the price if you don't really mind not having the same kind of things you're missing, which might be things like IBIS and not having super fast compact lenses. Now, like my uncle said, maybe you want to insist if you do not want to waste money, you could always just get a used GFX camera instead. Now, particularly for me, I got the GFX 50R, which was a fan favorite of the GFX camera, and I feel like a lot of people were kind of wishing for that back in this new release. But if you could find in some of the corners of the internet, you can actually get it for half the price of the new 100 RF. Now, before I start talking about that, maybe you don't want to see my face anymore in this video. I actually collected some of my friends around the YouTube space that have had the GFX 50R for far longer than I did, and I kind of want to know what they think about their experience while using it.
Hey Kofi and friends, thanks so much for having me on. My name is Ben Heisch, and I've been actually shooting with the GFX system off and on since its original inception with the GFX 50S. I actually owned that camera for the longest, and currently I feel a little bit odd because I don't actually own a GFX camera or the GFX 50R specifically at this point, so take that for what you will, I guess, but obviously I'm a giant lover of all things Fujifilm, and I just am in this weird position where I did one of the little campaigns with Hasselblad last year and had owned the 50S for a long time and had been using it in my professional wedding work for years, but just didn't feel like I needed to have multiple different medium format cameras. The reason the 50R is so appealing for the vast majority of people, the fact that, one, that 50 megapixel sensor is phenomenal. I mean, I have multiple different 60 megapixel and 100 megapixel cameras, but 50 megapixels is kind of the sweet spot for having a lot of information, but also being able to crop if need be, and also having like manageable file sizes. Because for me, the 50R and just medium format in general feels more like something when I'm going to be shooting something as if I was shooting film. So I'm not shooting in giant burst rates. I'm not relying on autofocus. I've never actually owned a GF autofocus lens. I've always used manual focus, which again is probably point number 2 in this, is that the GFX system is so adaptable. That camera in particular with the 50R, I've adapted plenty of Leica lenses, and there's tons of videos on my channel where I go and check out different 35mm format lenses and how well they fit onto that 44x33 sensor. That 44x33 sensor also, for me as someone that likes to compose a lot vertically, that is a obviously 4x3 aspect ratio, which I find to be much better suited for verticals than a 2x3. So even when I'm shooting in a 35mm 36x24 format, I'm often cropping that down to a 4x3 aspect ratio just because that feels so much better for a vertical image to me. And then the last thing about the GFX 50R and the reason why so many people are gravitating towards it is just the look and the feel. You're getting a bigger style X100 style camera. You have the offset viewfinder. And for me, I talk about this a lot on my channel, and the reason I like cameras like this, I like the Leicas and things, is that as you pull up your face to this camera, you're not completely blocking your face, right? You have this offset where you can sort of still interact with a potential subject. And for me, as someone that does weddings where I'm photographing hundreds of different people at a time where I need to be able to communicate what I'm getting at in my work quickly with them and sort of disarm people, having a camera that shows half of your face ends up being something that is a lot more beneficial, honestly, even than this little Nikon. This thing's cool and great, but it covers my entire face.
All right, so hey everyone, my name is Taha, also known as Snaps by Taha on Instagram and YouTube. So first things first, the main reason why I did get a 50R is mostly because I wanted the 50 megapixel sensor. As a Fujifilm shooter who owns an X-H2S and owned an X-T4, and I also own an X100VI, I just wanted more megapixels just to get that experience, what it feels like to have more megapixels. As shooting with Fujifilm my entire life, I never had the option to be able to crop in real close or real tight or get different looking compositions. So that was the main reason why I wanted a GFX 50R. It was also because I could not afford a GFX 100 or 102 or 100S2, and the only thing that was in my budget was a GFX 50R, which is an older camera. Now, talking about aesthetics, this camera looks absolutely beautiful. It looks like the older brother of an X100VI, or as if it ate the X100VI. And I love the fact that it has a rangefinder, and I don't know, it's just something about this camera, the shutter sound, everything, the experience, it's just very tactile, and I love the experience of shooting with a GFX 50R. So I made it my mission to find vintage lenses that can be adapted to the GFX 50R. And this pretty much opened up a whole new world for me, where I'm looking for vintage lenses, where I'm looking for unique bokeh, unique looks, lenses with a bunch of character, and they have very, very distinct looks, and they have different personalities and characteristics, which makes using vintage lenses on the GFX so much fun, because it's basically, you're like playing Pokemon and you're just trying to hunt the best lenses for your GFX. And finally is X-Pan, and I just love that aspect ratio. You can hate on me, you can dislike me, you can dislike the whole idea, you can think it's stupid. I love it. I just love shooting in 65:24. I think that aspect ratio just makes everything look like a movie, and I am not a DP, I'm not a person in the film industry. I am a person who loves movies, and I love making real life look like movies, and just seeing everything through the X-Pan aspect ratio makes me feel like I'm shooting my own movie, and it makes me feel special, and I like it.
What's up, friends and fans of Kofi? And Kofi, thanks for having me, man. So what's up, everybody? I'm George Edward, a photography YouTuber here on YouTube, and I'm going to talk to you about the 50R a little bit today. The main thing I want to talk to you about today is color, but before we get there, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a few things. So if you'll notice here, the lens I have on this is very tiny compared to the lenses that come with the GF system. So this is their 45mm, and this is a vintage Contax 45mm. One of the main things I wanted to highlight here is the ability to attach vintage lenses. You'll find this all over YouTube, but it's so cool when you have a camera that can do this. It just makes using this camera so much more personal and so much more fun. And honestly, that brings me directly to my next point. The form factor of this camera is so solid, and you can tell it was really built with a photographer in mind. It's not trying to be a hybrid camera where that can do all of these things for you. It's really just, in my opinion, meant for photography, which is exactly why I want it, and it's exactly what I use it for. If you're using an old lens, you have manual focus, so your focus rings on the lens and aperture's on the lens, and that's it. And then up top, you have this little scroll wheel here, and then you have this little tactile shutter speed dial. So the main call here, why I'm pointing those out, is these things are all directly here for you. So your exposure triangle you can get to without even having to go into a menu in the camera or even like a sub menu, which I really just don't like doing. So for me, I can use this camera in kind of like a hybrid style. It acts and feels a lot like an older film camera. However, it operates and functions like a digital camera, which is what I want. So it's a really nice hybrid workflow. I can go out and get photos without being inundated with digital menus, but I can come home and upload all of the images onto my computer and edit them and have them ready in a matter of minutes or hours, very much like you would in a digital workflow. So it works for me. It saves me money on film development, but all the while I'm not sacrificing image quality or color that I would be getting from something like film, which brings me directly to my next point, and the thing I want to spend the most amount of time talking about, even though I promise I'll be brief on that too. The colors out of this camera are superb. Now, someone smarter than me and more technical than me would be able to run you through why Fuji's colors are so good, but from a user's perspective, they are really so good. There's, I think, two kind of components to that. One, this like cropped medium format sensor just has so much dynamic range that you're getting so much information that you're able to pull out almost every single color you would want in a scene. That, and in tandem with the fact that medium format sensors kind of have this creaminess to them, and medium format in general, I think just because there's more information in the image, that it doesn't have any of like the digital harshness that you would expect from a digital camera. For instance, like the X100F, I just can't edit the colors in the same way that I do on this camera. They just end up coming off a little bit sharper, a little bit less natural feeling. This camera, however, has no no problem pulling any of those colors out. And so as I've been talking here, I've been putting up all of these different sample images for you to look at because these are some of my favorite images I've ever taken. And so when I edit, I'm mimicking the color palette of Fuji Pro 400H. It used to be my favorite film stock and they discontinued it, so it doesn't exist anymore. However, with this camera and this setup, I'm able to get pretty close to those colors routinely. That makes me so happy. Right? It works for me in so many different ways. The form factor is great. The colors are exactly what I would expect. And it allows me to get to the end product that I would want to get to in a relatively short time period. And that's what I think like my last kind of finishing notes on this would be is like, if you are a photographer looking for a photographer's camera, and maybe you already have a few other cameras, but you want to take like a semi-professional jump, this camera is amazing. But hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully this in combination with everything everyone else has talked about has given you a pretty good rundown on what this camera can and can't do. If you ever find yourself in like the predicament of whether or not you should or should not pick it up, my vote is you should. If you have the money to do it, you won't regret it. Because I know for as long as I have this thing, as long as it doesn't die, I'm going to continue to use it. It's my favorite camera. It's a part of my photography identity now, I think, which is really cool about a camera like this, that it can get that imprinted into your personal style. So Kofi, thanks for having me, and everyone else, thanks for watching. And if you're looking for more content on this camera, feel free to stop by George Edward. We're over there. See ya.
For those who don't know me, my name is Lonnie. I used to be a wedding photographer, but now I just take pictures for my own personal enjoyment and to document the things in my life that matter to me the most. And every once in a blue moon, I make a YouTube video about the gear I used to do so. With that being said, I came into the Fujifilm GFX 50R 2, maybe 3 years ago. And ever since then, it's kind of become my favorite camera to shoot, possibly ever. And I can probably distill that down to 3 distinct reasons if I'm quick about it. 2 that are easy to explain, and the third one, which may be a little more difficult for me to convey if you haven't used the camera before yourself. So with that, let's jump into reason number 1. It's really a combination of the size, the depth, the color, and the aspect ratio, which allows for a lot of flexibility. Yes, there are plenty of other cameras in the market now that match or even exceed the 50 megapixel resolution on this camera, but it's the actual physical size of the sensor that offers a different field of view and a different feel to the images that you really can't get anywhere else besides digital medium format. And honestly, with the final output, it is very subtle, but this experience of shooting it live with it in hand, seeing the results in real time as they come in, that allow for a different approach and kind of breathe a fresh air into your photography. You can kind of change the way you approach a scene given the different aspect ratio. You couple that with the beloved Fuji color science, and it's just a winning recipe. Last but not least, that aspect ratio. Already the native shape of the sensor allows for a little more real estate at the top and bottom, which, while subtle, can completely change the way the frame looks. But because of that high resolution and all of the different built-in aspect ratios within the camera that allow you to visualize before you capture, it allows for a ton of flexibility. Now, in my experience, this can generate kind of a creative spark for you if you've never shot on this format. All these changes are relatively subtle in the grand scheme of things, but it all comes together for a very special experience when you shoot this sensor. I could wax poetic about this sensor forever, but we don't have all day, so I'll quickly move on to the next point, the body. Okay, so this one should be nice and quick. Of the cameras I own, my favorites from a handling perspective are anything from the Fujifilm X Pro line, Fuji XE line, X100, Leica M series bodies, a Sony A7C. You get the gist. We're seeing a pattern here. I just love that offset viewfinder, that rangefinder style body. And with my big hands, this one is probably the best of the bunch when it comes to a handling perspective. I don't need a thumb grip. I do happen to use a grip from SmallRig. That's just because some of the lenses for this body can be extremely front heavy. But even without that, I can manage. So you combine that with a ton of customization, custom buttons everywhere, custom dial on the front, and it just makes for a dream with that offset viewfinder and a body this size with a sensor this size, which brings me to my last point. Honestly, this camera just has soul. The idea that we can get medium format sensor in a body of this style just feels like a collision of my preferred shooting style, ergonomics, form factor, along with supreme image quality and extreme flexibility. It can do street well, it can do landscape well, it can do candid photos well, portraits, studio sessions, you name it. you're going to get a beautiful 50 megapixel image, amazing color science, interesting looking depth, nice roll off on the highlights, high dynamic range, a filmic look, different aspect ratio. It just kind of has it all from an image quality standpoint. And usually for me, when I find a camera that can do all those things well, there's a lot of concessions I have to make when it comes to the ergonomics, the physical feel, the physical experience. And with this one, I feel like I get to have my cake and eat it too. So for me, it feels like Fuji was on the way to what would have been for me the perfect camera, and then they just stopped making them. So with that in mind, what would I add to this camera to make it quote unquote perfect? It already is so close. Honestly, for me, these days it would just be an update to the autofocus algorithms. And then of course, the battery. I would have them use the newer Fujifilm batteries, get more shots, battery availability would be better. Honestly, those two things alone would make this thing near perfect. However, if we were gonna throw everything at it, sure, give it the 100 megapixel sensor. And then if we're gonna go wild, a wish that I would have for this camera is that it had the actual hybrid viewfinder system from the X Pro series of bodies. Preferably the one from like the X Pro 2, because it had better magnification settings and still retained the little digital viewfinder window in the corner so that you can use the optical viewfinder with manual focus lenses and peaking and whatnot. If they were able to fit that into a new GFX body, I'd probably buy that in a heartbeat. But until then, you'll probably have to pry this one from my cold dead fingers.
Now, when you save half the price on a particular camera, you still might get some of the same feeling of using the camera. I do feel like if I use a GFX 100 RF, I'd get a lot of the same feelings on this guy, but there's gonna be a couple of differences. That's just an obvious part of life. For one, it's gonna be in the name. This has 50 megapixels where the GFX 100 RF has 100 megapixels, which is a lot more megapixels than I think I would bargain for. Now, with those 100 megapixels, you have to keep in mind, those dual card slots become a lot more important because you have gigantic files every time you shoot a raw photo. R also doesn't have good autofocus. I think Fuji doesn't have the best autofocus. They have a lot of room for improvement, but the 50R particularly isn't great. Its continuous autofocus isn't the greatest in the world. I use single shot majority of the time. But for me personally, I feel like in both situations, the experience of using this camera, you're probably not spraying and praying. You're probably acting a little bit more slowly. You're probably sitting down thinking about your composition, because that's part of the experience of using some of these point and shoot cameras with a fixed lens. The 50R I think only shoots in like 1080p. It's not great. Now the RF isn't a #1 contender in the video department either, but it can shoot in 4K up to 30 frames a second. You're also still gonna get the regular kind of dials that are on this guy, where you're gonna get things like the aspect ratio dial on the 100 RF. Now, is that aspect ratio dial a gigantic deal? For me personally, not really. I just kind of click on the Q button and I have no problem kind of going into my aspect ratios and changing those up. Doesn't bother me too much, but that is a unique feature that they've added in this camera, and I'm interested to see how it goes when a lot more people get this camera in hand and start shooting around with it. Now, keep in mind, if two of these situations happen, you best believe that I'm probably gonna have one. One is that my GFX 50R actually stops working. Let me knock on wood for, well, hang on. And number two is if Fuji drops one over at my door, I'm not gonna say no to it. And neither would you. Now, if you do look for one of these cameras, there's gonna be two things you have to keep in mind. For one, you're gonna have a higher shutter count on a used camera. Something to be aware of, and at the end of the day, I literally don't financially benefit if you do find a 50R and you actually end up buying one. I don't have affiliate links or anything like that. So if you find one, well, good luck and enjoy your camera. And the second part is kind of exactly that. You can only find a GFX 50R used. No one's really carrying them retail anymore. I mean, Fuji did do that sale at the beginning of the year or the end of the year, but outside of that, you're going to find them on the aftermarkets. I find sometimes a new camera comes out, some people will say, well, why don't you just get a used insert X camera that's comparable here? Sometimes there's only going to be a finite amount of those cameras versus the people that are in the market for it. For example, if you type in GFX 50R, you're probably going to find maybe 4 or 5 of them used, but if this video gets like, I don't know, 1,000 views, that's not enough people to facilitate everybody that might be interested in it versus how many that are available on the used market. So if you are going to look for them, good luck. I don't have affiliate links. I don't financially benefit if you do end up purchasing one. So there's that. Now, without me having the camera in hand, it's kind of hard for me to tell you who the camera's for, but I'm assuming that the positioning of where this camera is, that if you're somebody who has disposable income for point and shoot cameras that are going to be more than $3,000, this is just another addition to one of them. It's going to have a couple of quirks. It doesn't have the fastest lens in the world, but when I audit my own behavior, when I say that, I don't really shoot that much at night to begin with anyways. It doesn't have IBIS, but neither does my GFX 50R, and I've been just fine with it. But if you're someone who might have been buying like a Leica Q, whatever number it is now, and you maybe don't have Leica type of money because they're just gigantic price tags, and maybe you still want to use the GFX sensor because it's a really nice sensor, this is kind of a happy medium for it. Personally, for me, I don't have $5,000 to spend on it. But again, if Fuji wants to drop one off at my door, I will happily use one. I don't think it's a bad camera, it's just one that doesn't fit my finances.